In terms of security, most of the times, if you're a legal person with managing a portfolio, you get daunted about security. Zach, how does intelligence support non-technical domain managers to make decisions?
Well, on top of having your extremely helpful domain strategist there to break down any questions that you may have, if you happen to want to jump into intelligence, Kate, if you would scroll down to the first name server distribution area, uh, it breaks down things like your name servers that you have throughout your entire portfolio. What are the current services that they're using? We can help with possibly bringing these into some sort of policy, so that way you can have a consistent name server set for most of your domains. We understand that sometimes policies aren't always the one size fits all type situation. So this just helps you to be able to also keep track of where the other domains that don't fit within that policy or may have gotten an exception and everything may fall within your portfolio. And it just kind of helps with making sure that, you have your domains on the name servers that you would like them to be. Maybe you don't want to keep your domains on your retail registrar name servers whenever you have your own name servers, or you're using Cum Laude's name servers. So it helps with that. And then if we scroll down to SSLs, I believe, are the next. So with SSLs, this is going to be a little bit more important with making sure that this graph is not as diverse as it's showing on this. The Tiro group here would definitely have a long conversation with me about making sure that we get this down to as few providers as possible, because every single slice of this graph is a potential point of failure, with SSLs becoming more and more important in the internet these days, now that browsers are actually highlighting the fact that you don't have an SSL, or a lot of backend services may require SSLs. So if they get closer to expiration, then there's another point of failure on top of that. So while we'd love to be able to manage your SSLs for you through Cum Laude and everything, again, we also understand you have your own services and everything, but we are more concerned about making sure that you have the least amount of points of failure as possible on that point, because, like I was saying, SSLs are just becoming super important, and other changes coming down the line with things like possible 3-month expiration dates on SSLs. It's going to be very important to keep up to date and aware of where your entire portfolio is within the internet, and how secure your customers or your back end services and everything are actually being secured. So that's a big part there.
So,
Hi.
Zach, what I'm hearing from you is to try and consolidate your SSL certificate to as few providers as possible to avoid point of failure, and same applies to the DNS. And is there any number of providers? Would you say 2 or 3 maximum in DNS providers should any company have? Is there a limit where you feel comfortable that, okay, this client is using 2 providers and I think that's okay, rather than 4 providers or 5? Is there any rule in this, or what is the best way to have a successful domain management in terms of number of providers you're using for SSLs and DNS?
Right.
And this is
Uh,
open to all of you.
so the way that I look at it, the reason why I was wanting to kind of bunch both name servers and SSLs into one quick topic is because you have kind of a lot of the same general rules. You want to eliminate as many points of failure as possible. Between those two, there are slight different rules and everything. SSLs, ideally, you would have 1 to maybe 2 or 3 providers at most to provide your SSLs. For name servers, you can be a little bit more lenient depending on what your company's policy is. You want to have all of your most important domains on your name servers, and anything that is business related within that policy itself. There are going to be some, technical teams that may need to test with other name server sets or work with other sets just to make, maybe a backup or something along those lines. So you get a little bit more leeway in those conversations where you could potentially have, 5 to 10 sets of name servers. But again, you're adding in more points of failure, possibly, with having more and more name server sets in there. Hopefully that helps answer. I don't know if anybody else has more insight on that.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that. I think what we do with intelligence is we sort of call out where there's three or more name server providers or three or more SSL providers. That's not to say, like that Zach says, that's not to say that it's bad to have three or more name server providers. What we're saying is if you've got three or more name server providers, the chances are that your portfolio is fragmented. When it comes to name servers, it's really important that you know who your name server providers are and what names are assigned to those name servers, so that if and when it comes to making a change to that domain, that it needs a new MX record or it needs a new A record, or whatever it is, that you know, or your tech team know exactly where to go. So obviously with that, the more name server suppliers you have, the higher the more the risk of failure with that. So there's no right or wrong in terms of how many name server providers you have, but we do call it out as an area of risk if we see three or more, just because we think that's where the point of kind of clients not necessarily knowing what name servers their names are assigned to, and not necessarily being able to quickly make changes to those names if they don't know where the name servers are.
And there's nothing worse than whenever that happens, where the technical contact for the name servers may have left the company, years ago, but the domain has been fine up until now. And yeah, I can't count the number of times on my hand that I've had to assist on something like that with tracking down that. And this definitely helps with eliminating that point of failure.
Yeah,
and I think,
go on, Tim.
No, I was just going to say, this sort of brings us back to the point that I was making earlier, which is with the visualization. You haven't had to go hunting around in a spreadsheet for this. You can see it on a great colourful pie chart right in front of you, and it's spotting those patterns. And it makes it really obvious if it's in bright orange that you've got domains with the wrong provider, perhaps. And you can be proactive and manage these at your leisure, rather than being reactive and having to sort out a problem, as Zach said, at the very last minute, when you're trying to make a change to a zone file at the very last minute, just before something goes live.
A very important point there, Tim, about being proactive than reactive. That's a key point for how you manage your portfolio. You look at your portfolio, you look at your DNS, you look at your SSLs. I think what we talk about most of the time is the data integrity, and I think this comes as part of data integrity. It's not just who owns the domain, but also what the servers are, who is the SSL provider, and quite importantly, as we said, visualization. Spreadsheets don't give you everything, but this one, it helps you quickly make decisions, which is quite important. I have a question for the panel. With cybersecurity, with everything that's going on in the world, what is the best practice on name servers? What would you advise me as a client who has a portfolio and is looking to be safe and sleep at night? What can Com Laude do?
Shall I leap in on that one?
Yeah.
I'm going to take it slightly broader than just name servers. And I think there are two things in terms of brand protection that intelligence helps with. So brand protection is obviously about protecting your brand. So it's protecting the trademarks, monitoring and checking for third-party domains. But it's also making sure that your portfolio, your own portfolio, your first-party domains are held in line with best practice. So there are two bits here that help, as I said. So we've got, first of all, Kate highlighted earlier that it can pick out using the algorithm the obsolete domains, the domains that you can get rid of. But also what it does is it really highlights those domains that are at the other side, the really critical ones. And some of these might not be entirely obvious. You might have a domain, for example, that's used in some back-end server that gets a whole ton of traffic, but isn't entirely obvious. So the algorithm picks these out. It uses lots of data points, so it'll identify all your critical domains. And then what you can do is make sure that those are all held in line with best practice, so that you've got the right SSL certificate for them, that they're registry locked, that they've got SPF DMARC records, things like that on the zone file, to ensure that they're held in line with best practice. And that's really, really important part of brand protection, is protecting your own domains in the first instance, making sure they're not a vector for attacks. The other thing that I think is quite important as well, and Kate again touched on it earlier, is the automated gap analysis that automatically checks your brands against availability. And gap analyses are nothing particularly new in the industry. I think everyone who's on this webinar will be familiar with them. But I think one of the problems is with the traditional gap analysis is that they're very naught and one. They just tell you what's available and what isn't. So what you could register, not necessarily what you should register. And brand protection is all about balance. You've got to balance the cost of that protection versus the protection that it provides. And you've got to get good value for money, show a good return on investment. So what intelligence does, as you can see on the screen there, we've divided every available domain into high risk, medium risk, low risk. And this shows that if a domain is available to register, what is the risk to your brand of not registering that domain name? So this uses a complex algorithm that's on a per client basis. And so it allows you to go, right, that Russian or Chinese domain is available. Those are important markets for me, so I need to get that domain name registered. But perhaps these other domain names in other territories or other spaces, I don't necessarily need those. They're less important. We can leave those for the minute. So it's, as always with brand protection, it's getting that balance right between cost and return on investment. And intelligence is designed to help with that.
Thank you, Tim. And you all spoke about looking at what the domain is doing. Is it working for you? In the event that I'm not a Com Laude client, how are you going to be able to get this data for me with DNS queries and criticality of my domains? What would you need from me, or how do you get this data?
So shall I take that? So customers or non-customers, as it were, they can get in touch with us. And if you want to see this data, just get in touch with us. And if you provide us a list, just an Excel of your domain portfolio, we can get it into this system. And then system will run against it, and it will do all of these checks. We'll probably have a conversation with the customer before we run it, just so we can understand a little bit more about their business, about their territories, so that we can set this up to really run in the background and really give them kind of the key information that they want to get from this value distribution chart and the name server distribution, etc.
Thank you. Back to Zach. In terms of registry logs, why should I worry about having a registry log on my domain? Why is that part of a key way of managing my portfolio as a client.
Well, a registry lock is not only just important for the overall domain security itself, for how the name servers are set for the domain and everything, but it's also a big part of peace of mind for everyone involved. Knowing that you don't have to worry about the name servers suddenly being changed to something unauthorized or anything along those lines. So it's very important to make sure that your main brands, or possibly even your extremely important technical domains for the backends, to have these locks in place. Yeah.
So that's an additional security level to mitigate against changes, hijacking, and updates that are not planned or authorized.